Did you know that a brother and sister, each wielding a sword and a scepter, turned the tide against the Viking tide that had ravaged England for 3 decades? In the early 10th century, the kingdom of Mercia, under the iron-handed rule of King Edward the Elder and his sister Æthelflæd, was the last bastion of Anglo-Saxon resistance to the Norse invaders who had seized York, East Anglia, and much of the east coast. The story begins in 878, when the Great Battle of Edington forced the Viking king Guthrum to accept baptism and a treaty that divided England between the Christians and the Danes. Yet the peace was fragile. Within a generation, the Danes, now known as the Danelaw, pressed again, exploiting the weakness of the fragmented Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. By the time Edward, son of Alfred the Great, ascended the throne in 899, the Viking presence in the Midlands and the north threatened the very heart of England. Edward's first act as king was to reinforce the network of burhs, fortified towns, established by his father. These earthwork walls, often 10 feet high and topped with wooden palisades, were spaced a day's march apart, allowing rapid deployment of the fyrd, the local militia, and ensuring that no Viking raiding party could travel more than a day without encountering a defended settlement. In 902, Edward seized the strategic port of London from the Danes, establishing a royal mint that produced the first silver pennies bearing his name. A move that not only secured revenue, but also symbolized the reassertion of English authority over the Thames trade routes. The capture of London forced the Viking leader Ragnar of York to retreat to the east, where he attempted to rebuild his power base in the fertile lands of East Anglia. While Edward consolidated the southern and eastern frontiers, his sister Aethhelflæd, the Lady of the Mercians, turned her attention to the western Midlands. Married to Æthelred, the Mercian ealdorman, she had already earned a reputation for shrewd diplomacy and military acumen. After Æthelred's death in 911, Æthelflæd assumed de facto control of Mercia, a rare instance of a woman commanding an army in early medieval Europe. She immediately began a program of fortification, overseeing the construction of new burhs at Tamworth, Warwick, and Leicester, each encircled by a ditch up to 12 feet deep and a timber wall reinforced with iron spikes. These strongholds cut off Viking supply lines and created a defensive wall that forced the Norse to either negotiate or retreat. In 917, Edward and Æthelflæd coordinated a joint campaign that marked the first major offensive against the Danelaw in decades. The two forces converged on the River Humber, a natural barrier that had long protected the Viking kingdom of Northumbria. Edward's navy, composed of longships modified for riverine warfare, escorted a fleet of 300 sailing vessels that carried troops up the river to the fortified settlement of Torksey. There, a decisive battle unfolded. The Anglo-Saxons employed a novel tactic of forming a shield wall interspersed with archers, while the Vikings, accustomed to open sea raids, struggled in the narrow waterways. The defeat forced the Northumbrian Vikings to abandon Torksey, and Edward seized the valuable metalwork workshops that had supplied their warships. Æthelflæd's next target was the key Mercian town of Derby, held by a Danish chieftain named Sigehelm. In the winter of 918, she launched a surprise attack using a contingent of mounted spearmen, an innovation that broke the traditional reliance on infantry in Anglo-Saxon warfare. By seizing Derby, she not only eliminated a Viking foothold, but also secured a critical crossing over the River Trent, enabling the rapid movement of troops between the Midlands and the southern heartland. Capture of Derby also allowed Æthelflæd to impose a tribute on the surrounding Danish estates, generating an annual revenue of £2,000 of silver that funded further fortifications. The twin successes of Edward and Æthelflæd prompted a shift in Viking strategy. Rather than continuing fragmented raids, the Norse leaders began to consolidate under a single ruler, a man known as Sihtric or Sitric of York, who was appointed king by the Danish king of East Anglia in 921. Sihtric sought to legitimize his rule by marrying a local noblewoman, thereby binding the Viking elite to the English aristocracy. Yet his attempts at diplomacy were undercut by the relentless pressure from the Anglo-Saxon burhs, which choked the economic lifelines of his kingdom. By 923, the once prosperous port of York was reduced to a shadow of its former self, its warehouses empty and its shipyards silent. In response to the growing threat, Edward instituted a series of legal reforms that reinforced his claim to a unified English kingdom. The Law Code of 925, recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, stipulated that any land seized by a Viking without royal consent would be confiscated and redistributed to loyal subjects. This policy not only deprived the Danes of new territory, but also encouraged Anglo-Saxon nobles to invest in the reconstruction of war-torn villages, thereby fostering a resurgence of agricultural productivity. The resulting increase in grain output, estimated at 15% between 925 and 930, provided the necessary sustenance for larger armies and bolstered the kingdom's tax base. Meanwhile, Æthelflæd turned her focus to the western frontier, where the kingdom of Wessex had long held sway. In 928, she negotiated a marriage alliance with the king of the Welsh kingdom of Powys, cementing a mutual defense pact that prevented the Vikings from exploiting the borderlands. The alliance was sealed by the exchange of gifts, a golden chalice bearing the inscription Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians, Protector of the Realm, and a set of silver horse trappings presented by the Welsh king. This diplomatic maneuver not only secured the western flank, but also opened a channel for intelligence sharing, allowing Æthelflæd to anticipate Viking movements across the Severn. The year 930 marked a pivotal moment when Edward, now in his 30th year, led a massive army, estimated at 12,000 men, into the heart of the Danelaw. The campaign began with a siege of the fortified town of York, which had withstood Viking attacks for centuries. Edward's engineers, employing the same techniques used in the construction of burhs, built a series of earthworks and wooden towers that gradually tightened the noose around the city. After a protracted siege lasting 6 months, the defenders, exhausted and cut off from supplies, surrendered. The capitulation of York was not merely symbolic. It handed Edward control of the largest coin mint in northern England and the strategic road network that linked the north to the Midlands. Æthelflæd's role in the York siege was less visible but equally vital. She dispatched a contingent of 2,000 archers from Tamworth to reinforce Edward's forces, and her intelligence officers provided detailed maps of the city's waterways, enabling the Anglo-Saxons to block the River Ouse and prevent reinforcements from arriving. Moreover, Æthelflæd's diplomatic outreach to the local Anglo-Saxon elite persuaded many of them to switch allegiance, thereby weakening the internal cohesion of the Viking garrison. The fall of York shifted the balance of power decisively in favor of the English, and the Danelaw began to fragment into smaller, less coordinated polities. In the aftermath, Edward and Æthelflæd pursued a policy of reconquest through settlement. They granted lands formerly held by Vikings to loyal Thens, who were required to build fortified homesteads known as coats and maintain a small retinue of soldiers. This policy created a patchwork of defensible communities that acted as a buffer against any future raids. By 935, the number of such settlements in the former Danelaw region had risen to over 200, each contributing an average of 30 men to the royal levy. The resulting increase in available troops allowed Edward to field a standing force of 15,000 men, an unprecedented size for an early medieval kingdom. The sibling partnership faced its most severe test in 937, when a coalition of Viking chieftains, led by the formidable Guthrum Roman II, assembled a fleet of 150 longships on the River Humber. Their objective was to retake York and re-establish a Viking hegemony over the north. Edward, now seasoned by decades of warfare, chose to meet the invaders at the Battle of Burh, a site whose exact location remains debated, but is commonly identified near modern-day Brampton in Northumberland. The battle unfolded in 3 phases: an initial Viking charge, a counter-attack by Edward's cavalry, and a decisive infantry clash where Æthelflæd's Mercian spearmen formed a phalanx that broke the Viking line. Contemporary chroniclers recorded that the battle lasted a full day, with casualties estimated at 2,000 on the Viking side and 1,200 among the Anglo-Saxons. The victory at Burh cemented Edward's claim as king of the whole of Britain and forced the surviving Vikings to retreat to the Irish Sea, where they were subsequently absorbed into the emerging Norse Gaelic kingdoms of Dublin. Æthelflæd's contributions to the victory extended beyond the battlefield. In the months preceding Burh, she had overseen the construction of a massive supply depot at Tamworth, stocked with grain, iron, and leather, resources that sustained Edward's army during the campaign. She also instituted a system of watchtowers along the river routes, each manned by a small garrison that relayed signals using fire and horn blasts. This early warning network allowed Edward to anticipate the Viking approach and mobilize his forces with unprecedented speed. The logistical innovations introduced by Æthelflæd would later be emulated by later Norman and Plantagenet rulers, highlighting her lasting impact on English military organization. The triumph at Burh ushered in a period of relative stability, but the siblings faced new challenges from within. In 939, Edward's son Aethhelflæd died unexpectedly, leaving the succession uncertain. Æthelflæd, now in her early 60s, was urged by Mercian nobles to claim the throne herself. Though she declined, preferring to act as a regent for her son Æthelflæd, she continued to command military operations, notably the 941 campaign against the Welsh kingdom of Gwynedd, which resulted in the capture of the fortified hill fort of Deganwy. Her ability to project power across both England and Wales demonstrated the extent to which the Mercian kingdom had become a central pillar of the emerging unified state. By 944, Edward's health was failing, and he appointed his son Æthelstan as co-king, a practice that ensured a smooth transition. The same year, Æthelflæd died at Tamworth, her body interred in the newly founded Abbey of St. Mary, a monastery she had patronized throughout her life. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legacy endured in the fortified towns and administrative reforms that defined the English kingdom for centuries. Edward survived his sister by only a few months, dying in July 946, and was succeeded by Æthelstan, who would become the first king to rule over a fully consolidated England. The reconquest orchestrated by Edward and Æthelflæd had profound consequences beyond the battlefield. The reclamation of the Danelaw territories facilitated the spread of Christianity into previously pagan strongholds, as monasteries such as the newly founded St. Albans were endowed with lands previously held by Viking chieftains. The influx of silver from the captured mint at York enriched the royal treasury, enabling the minting of standardized coinage that stabilized the economy and encouraged trade with the continent. Moreover, the administrative reforms, particularly the codification of land tenure and the establishment of the shire system, laid the groundwork for the English legal tradition that would later influence common law across the globe. The sibling dynasty also reshaped the cultural landscape. Norse art and language, once dominant in the East, began to blend with Anglo-Saxon motifs, producing hybrid styles evident in stone carvings, jewelry, and illuminated manuscripts. Syncretism is visible in the St. Cuthbert Gospel, where Viking interlace patterns frame Christian iconography, symbolizing the merger of two worlds under a common rule. The integration of Viking settlers into English society also contributed to the demographic shift that would later be reflected in the Domesday Survey of 1086, where former Viking lands were recorded as productive estates under English lordship. In the grand sweep of history, the reconquest achieved by Edward and Æthelflæd stands as a turning point that transformed a fragmented collection of petty kingdoms into a nascent nation-state. Their combined military ingenuity, diplomatic finesse, and administrative vision not only expelled the Viking threat, but also forged a unified identity that would endure through the Norman conquest and beyond. The story of a brother and sister wielding both sword and scepter reminds us that the foundations of modern England were laid not merely by battles, but by the relentless pursuit of order, unity, and resilience. Their legacy endures in the stone walls that still dot the English landscape, in the legal codes that echo through centuries, and in the very notion that a united England could rise from the ashes of relentless invasion.